influence in the United Arab Republic. So there were these joint ventures with Israeli intelligence.
We were strategic and tactical reconnaissance photo processing specialists. We flew probably 8 missions that day. All bomb damage assessment, all airports in disarray, lines of aircraft destroyed in place. From what we saw in that film, it was unchallengeable destruction of the enemy.
This covert operation was also part of cyanide. Before the war, the team had secretly been sent to an Israeli air base in the Negev desert. The men wore unmarked uniforms and had no ID, while 4 American reconnaissance planes were disguised as Israeli.
There was a hurry-up paint job done to the aircraft to identify them as Israeli aircraft, so that they would be in conformance with normal Israeli markings.
No, not one single word of it is true. I don't know what is the man. I don't know. Fantasy. It's a fantasy. He's dreaming. He is making it up. Nothing.
They can deny it now. Fine. Take a look at the reconnaissance information that the Israelis have that was published publicly in Time magazine, Life magazine, I think Look magazine. That was our work. The Israelis had no reconnaissance aircraft, and you can't get the detail off of gun cameras that was in those films.
If it's true that America was secretly in the war against Egypt, this had to be kept quiet at all costs.
Well, the implication would be very serious. I mean, first of all, it means that LBJ and his people around him had been lying to us through their teeth, and that might be a minor matter for most people, but it'd be important to us. But more important, it would mean an American participation in the attack on Egypt. A very serious thing for us to have done, and it would have, finished our relations with the Arab world for a long time to come. As it was, 6 Arab states broke relations with us.
Whatever lies behind the attack, the human tragedy was that 34 young men were dead. Most were killed below decks, and their remains could only be removed when the Liberty finally arrived at Malta. By then, the bodies of 5 others had drifted out of the hole. Only when the dock was drained did the full horror of the destruction become apparent.
I remember taking that photograph, and I remember seeing parts of bodies in the cables and wiring that were jammed around, especially in the top part. It seemed like on the overhead, a lot of parts of bodies were hanging there. It looked like a meat locker. We had to go down and start cleaning that up.
One of the men killed was Alan Blue, the NSA linguist so suddenly sent abroad. His wife didn't even know he was on the USS Liberty.
I was sitting in a park in Washington, D.C., having my lunch about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on June 8. It was a beautiful, clear, sunny day. And about 15-20 feet away from me, someone had a radio.
Administration handling of the June Arab-Israeli war crisis.
And I overheard this report on their radio that an American ship had been attacked in the Mediterranean. And my heart sank. Even though I did not know he was on that ship, I was still very frightened. I picked up my lunch. I went inside to my office. I called NSA, and they said, yes, we've been looking for you.
Alan Blue was later buried at Arlington National Cemetery. For the previous month, His widow had had to share her house with minders from the NSA. They told her nothing and controlled her contact with the outside world.
I think they were anxious to not have any press around us at that time. No one from the NSA ever contacted me to explain what happened. There were many, many people at the service. I'm not sure who they all were.
In Malta, meanwhile, the Liberty men were alarmed by the way Admiral Kidd was steering the naval inquiry. He seemed to have made up his mind in advance and was ignoring crucial evidence.
I testified about 3 major items that I had witnessed. One was the captain's condition. I also testified about the armor-piercing projectiles that had been sent through our ship. And I also testified about the machine gunning of the life rafts by the Israeli torpedo boats. I testified, like I said, for about 2.5, 3 hours. I didn't know until, I don't remember, months later, that much of my testimony was never recorded.
McGonigal had blacked out during the attack, so the chief engineer took command of the ship. Yet the inquiry wasn't interested in what he had to say.
I got so peeved off I couldn't see straight. Before it broke up, I stood outside the door and wanted to go in there so that I could get my say in those minutes that were being taken. But he wanted to keep me out of that almost completely.
The report was reviewed at the Navy's European headquarters by Merlin Starring, later the Navy's top lawyer. It didn't appear to support Kidd's conclusion that Israel had attacked in error.
Well, I simply could not find an evidentiary basis for that conclusion. I had considerable trouble with the record in attempting to, as I read through it, attempting to find the evidence, the testimony, or other evidence that would support some of the findings or opinions or conclusions that the Court of Inquiry had drafted and had reached.
Today, even after 35 years, the Liberty incident remains so sensitive that the U.S. Navy refuses to comment on it.
I think there was a cover-up. I think there were details known from talking with some of those crew. It was pretty bad.
How can my personal view be other than my American view, which was that they intended to attack this ship, and there's no excuse that can be found for their saying that this was just a mistake?
Most importantly, President Johnson, like Richard Helms, would also have been getting the radio intercepts.
It's like a cable or a telex, right, that was sent to all the intelligence agencies and to the White House at the same time, because it was an American ship being attacked by a friendly power. Anything that's inimical and dangerous to the United States that the president has to see on a near real-time basis, he has to receive it.
Did Johnson order a cover-up?
No, that I'm aware of.
But people were sworn to secrecy. The naval inquiry is regarded by many as incomplete.
You ask McNamara about those questions, I'm not going to answer those.
I am not saying anything about the Liberty, period.
In Israel, it was soon business as usual. An inquiry attended by the Navy chief, Shlomo Arel, concluded that the attack was mainly due to a series of Israeli blunders. Despite this, nobody was charged or court-martialed.
They didn't find anyone guilty of committing any crime or negligence or whatever. But this is I don't want to